Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Tropical Rum Society. As always, I'm your host Matt, and today we're going to be talking about a rum that some Americans might not ever get to taste, the Havana Club Tres Años. And yes, it is in Spanish, and yes, I don't know Spanish. I mean, I did study Spanish for like 3 years when I used to live in America, but we also had a really terrible Spanish teacher who taught us nothing, so don't rely on my pronunciation for any of these words. So as usual, we'll start by talking about Havana Club, and we'll talk a little bit about why it's basically banned in America. Then we'll jump into some more specifics about the Tres Años, and then we'll do the tasting, and I'll give you my thoughts. Let's jump into the first question, which is, why is Havana Club so hard to get in America? I mean, I've got it here, it's not hard to get in the UK, so what is it about America that makes it so difficult to get? The answer to that is Havana Club comes from Cuba. And if you know anything about world history, you probably know that America and Cuba don't have the best of relationships. They've had a pretty tense history ever since the 1960s when communism was on the rise. Without getting too deep into the politics of it, ever since 1962, there's been a trade embargo between the US and Cuba, which means that Cuban producers of goods are unable to export into America. So obviously, this makes it pretty hard for Havana Club to get their rums into American bars and liquor stores and places that people will be able to get their hands on it. Now, it hasn't always been this way. Back in 1878, the Archibald family opened a distillery in Cardenas, I feel like is how I would pronounce that. This distillery produced rum for a number of years, and the son of the original owner started the label Havana Club in 1934. The distillery was then taken over by the Cuban government in 1959 and was run by them exclusively until 1993 when Pernod Ricard entered a joint agreement with the Cuban government, which means they have a 50-50 stake in Havana Club now. We have a few other Havana Club products coming up in the future, so we'll go a little bit more into the brands in those future videos. Make sure you subscribe if you want to see them. But one last interesting fact that I found while researching Havana Club, which is the way that the rum masters actually determine when the rum is ready. These Maestros del Ron rely pretty heavily on their sensations. So they pour the rum onto their hands, give it a bit of a feel, and when they have the right texture, that's when they know the rum is ready. They also smell the aroma on their hands once the alcohol's evaporated to know what kind of flavors are in that barrel. Then, using their extensive knowledge and history, they pick which barrels they want to use, and that ends up becoming Havana Club. So now on to the Tres Años more specifically. This is considered by many to be one of the most prestigious light rums that there is. There's many people who say that the Tres Años brings a degree of class and elegance to cocktails when you make them with it. And the general vibe of the Tres Años is that it's really good for making a premium style of cocktail. Personally, I'm not too sure about this. I am a little bit skeptical because it might just be considered more rare and difficult to acquire, which is giving it some of that prestige. But that's not to say it's a bad rum. I've definitely clearly had some of it, and I quite like it. It's a 40% ABV drink, which makes it 80 proof, and it's distilled from molasses that come from Cuba. This distillation is then put into ex-bourbon oak barrels and aged for 3 years, hence the name Tres Años. Once it's finished aging and it's ready to go, the rum is put through a charcoal filtering process, which takes a lot of the color out of that barrel aging. And speaking of the color, let's take a look at its appearance. The Tres Años bottle is a little bit plain. It's a very standard kind of bottle, very standard size, height, width, so it's probably designed to fit easily into bars for making cocktails. It's not quite as detailed or unique as some of the previous rums that we've taken a look at, but that being said, it does have a pretty nice label. Those reds and yellows are bright and bold, and the gold outline is a nice touch. Overall, the label has a pretty classic feel, and it gives me images of sitting in a bar watching the vintage cars go past in front of some historic buildings in Havana. Personally, I've never been to Havana, but I have seen stock footage of it, so close enough. Now let's take a look at the actual liquid itself. So as always, I'm going to pour some in the glass, and I promise this time I'm going to get it right in terms of the size. Here we go. Take the lid off, take the glass, and just pour a little bit in. Just a little bit. Better? Maybe. So I would definitely call this a light rum, but not a white rum. It's got a slight yellowish tinge to it, like a pale straw, but it's definitely not as silvery as, say, the Plantation 3-Star, which we've taken a look at. It is slightly viscous, it does stick to the glass, and could potentially be due to the oily texture that the rum masters look for when making this rum. On to the smell. It's very sweet, but very mellow. It's light and kind of fresh, but it doesn't really smell that complex. It's a little bit of like a zest to it, and it's almost kind of citrusy, kind of like if you had squeezed a lemon like yesterday and there's still kind of that faint smell of that lemon zest in the air. It really doesn't smell too strongly of alcohol either, especially after sniffing it a few times. There was a little bit of a hit of alcohol on the first sniff, but after a few, it's kind of faded into the background. After getting a bit deeper into the glass, there's kind of a banana-like kind of smell, but not fresh bananas. It reminds me of those tiny little hard banana lollies that you would get from gumball machines when I was a kid. Kind of artificial in its banana, but sweet banana. That might not be the best comparison, because I don't know if you would have ever tasted those tiny little bananas, but they're the closest that I can think of for that banana flavor. So let's see if the taste can match it. It's a little bit hard to swallow. It's very rough, very bitey. Much easier on the second one. That first one was a big sting to the mouth. It's almost like there's a sharp spike of sensation when you first taste it, and then that kind of fades a little bit as you progress. A little bit more flavor comes out after that first hit, but even then, it's not a very big or complicated, complex flavor. There's a slight pineapple flavor, and it's got kind of a nice oily mouthfeel, but the most noticeable thing was when it just pummeled me in the face with that initial sip. The flavor doesn't really evolve so much, it just becomes a little bit more pronounced once you can start paying a bit more attention to it, but it's pretty consistent throughout the whole time. This one makes me think of that phrase, short and sweet, that people use in meetings or at speeches all the time, where it's just like, as soon as you hear it, you know they're going to be talking for a while. But this drink is the exception that proves the rule. It is short in its amount of flavor, but it is quite sweet. Now that I've had a couple of sips, we'll take one more and see if my mouth has become a little bit more accustomed to it, and whether that is impacting the flavor at all. Nope, it's still very difficult to swallow that initial part. Like, it's almost like my throat is clenching up as it starts to go down. It's a weird sensation. It's not a bad flavor, it's just a little bit difficult to drink. So overall, I'd say this is probably not the most exciting or flavorful rum that I've ever tasted, but that's not what it's intended to be. Havana Club says that this is the ideal rum for cocktails in Cuba. So it's really meant to be mixed into things like daiquiris and mojitos and all those other sorts of cocktails that need a good, solid rum base. I would say that this is probably my favorite rum for making a Cuba Libre, which is Coke, lime, and some of the Havana Club Tres Años. That mixes together really well. If you're not in America and you can get yourself a bottle, let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. I'd be really interested to see what some other people think. And as always, let me know of any other rums that you'd like to see me do in the future. For now, I'm going to finish this off. We'll get the Tres Años over onto the shelf, and I'll see you next week for our next meeting.